So here's the scenario today. You have $700 to spend on a gaming PC, and you're curious what type of PC you can put together. Well, I put together a PC that, if all the parts were brand new, would retail for right around $700. So we're going to take a tour of this PC, take a look at what's in it, some things that you might want to change in case you didn't just happen to have some of these parts laying around, and we'll just take a look at what you can generally get for about $700. That's it, right in that mid-range category for gaming PCs. Let's check it out. Okay, so let's run down this parts list really quickly here. Several of these parts I've used in other builds before. Some of them are brand new. So we're going to start off with the CPU as usual, and this time we're going with the Ryzen 5 1600. And the reason I'm going with that particular chip is just because I had one laying around. If I were building this brand new, I would go ahead and get a Ryzen 2600 for those higher clock speeds, especially if you plan on overclocking. The 2600 can give you a little bit better performance and generally isn't that much more expensive right now than the 1600. But if you want to save a little bit of extra money, the 1600 is only $150 on Amazon or on Walmart's website right now. So it's still a great value. If you're more team blue, you could always pick up something like an i5 8400, and a cheap motherboard would make that a comparable trade-off. So for our motherboard here, I'm going with my favorite motherboard brand, which is ASUS. I've just always had great experience with ASUS motherboards. My first motherboard was an ASUS Sabertooth Revision 2, is a 990FX board, and ever since then I've loved the UEFIs. They've always been great. I've never had one that's had any problems whatsoever, so I always like to go back to ASUS when I get a chance to. And in this case, we're going with the Prime B350M. So it's a micro ATX motherboard, but it does have some of those extra PCIe by 1 slots, which does allow us to do something like add a wireless card down the road very easily if that's something we're interested in doing. Not doing that with this build today, but it does give us that support in the future. Also comes with an NVMe slot in case you want to put in a faster SSD, which we're also not doing. Again, though, that upgrade path being available is great. And of course, being a B350 board, you can either go with that Ryzen 5 1600 or with a Ryzen 5 2600, or even get something a little bit beefier like a Ryzen 7 1700 or 2700 if you need to sort of tailor this system a little bit more to your specific needs. The AM4 platform in general just gives you a lot of flexibility with what CPUs you want to put in, and also gives you a great upgrade path down the road. And of course, this motherboard does have the one thing that I almost always look for in a Ryzen motherboard, which is 4 DIMM slots. So we're starting with 8 gigabytes of RAM, but because we're only occupying 2 of those slots, we do have that fully upgradable path moving forward if we want to upgrade straight to 16 gigabytes. Anything beyond 16 gigabytes gets a little bit rough, because then we either don't have matching sticks or you're replacing RAM sticks, which are quite expensive right now. So 16 gigabytes would be the most logical upgrade in this case. And of course, we could make this motherboard a little bit cheaper by getting an A320 board, but I'm going B350 here because if you want to overclock, you need B350 or X370 or the second generation Ryzen equivalents, the B450s and the X470s. But the point here is this will allow us to overclock, and typically B350 boards do about as good of a job as X370 boards in overclocking anyways, so this board will be perfect for our use case. And then we get into things that aren't quite as fascinating. So we have the Corsair Vengeance LPX. We have an 8 gigabyte kit running at 3000 megahertz, at least rated, though my particular kit with my motherboard and my CPU, all of which are factors that may influence how fast you can run your RAM, especially on first generation Ryzen chips, which typically have a little bit more of a finicky behavior with the RAM that you put in them, especially more close to launch. Now they've sort of worked most of those out, but my combination was able to get this RAM running at 3200 megahertz, which is a little bit of an overclock over the rated speed of 3000. So good on Corsair, AMD, and ASUS in that case, all those components working together. For our storage here, we have an inland 120 gigabyte SSD running at just $25. That gives us some really nice fast boot storage for our operating system or key applications, things like Chrome or Skype, whatever it is that you use on your regular basis. And then, of course, maybe a couple smaller games. Definitely not going to be fitting a whole lot of larger games on the SSD like GTA or anything like that. And then for our hard drive here, we have a 500 gigabyte Western Digital hard drive, and I picked this up very cheaply. It's $25. I've been using them in my builds that I've been selling recently because they are a really good value. Though again, if you need more storage because you play a wide variety of games at any given moment, you can always get something like a 1 terabyte drive instead, which will cost you $15-ish more than the $25 for this particular drive. But again, sort of tailor this build to your needs. For the video card, we're going with an RX 580 8GB version from XFX. Now, in this case, I would recommend just getting the cheapest RX 580 that you can with 8GB of RAM. I just happen to have this one laying around. So if you look at the system build here, this is a $250 RX 580 right now, at least through PC Part Picker. There are cheaper ones out there, so you could save about $20 right now if you just get a cheaper variant of the exact same card. You'll get the exact same performance with it. I just put it on this list because it's the exact component that I'm using right now. For our power supply on the PC Part Picker list, I have the EVGA 500 watt 80 plus bronze certified. Right now with the rebate through B&H, you can get it for $20. And my recommendation here is go with a reputable brand and get the cheapest one that'll do the job for you that you feel comfortable with. In my case, for the most part, I don't like to put power supplies in builds that are less than 80 plus bronze rated at least. Ideally, obviously, you would get something more like 80 plus gold rating, but I am comfortable with EVGA as a brand in general. Love their graphics cards, have never had any of their other products other than the graphics cards, but the brand itself is very reputable, so I'm comfortable with a $20 power supply with them, especially because it normally would retail more for like $40. And then the last bit here is the DIY PC Diamond F1 case, and this is about the cheapest tempered glass case that you can find. And I'll tell you right now, if you are somebody that is actually putting together your PC and you pick this case up, there are a couple things that you need to be fully aware of. First of all, your power supply needs to be about 6 inches or less in length because the hard drive caddy gets in the way. It's non-removable. Well, it is removable. With a drill, you just can't put it back in once you do remove it the first time. So it's riveted in there. It's a permanent fixture. You can remove it if you just don't need it. That's totally up to you whether you want to do that or not. But no, it can very easily block your power supply cables from being able to easily route around it. The other thing with that hard drive caddy is that if you have a modular or semi-modular power supply, getting the cables plugged in is very difficult. Whereas this is one of the only times I would ever say this, I actually recommend with this case getting a non-modular power supply because all the cables are bunched up and moved to the far side of the power supply, which makes it quite easy to route the cables around where you need them to go. Now, if you have a shorter power supply that you're putting in there, something like, I don't know, 4 or 5 inches in length, then you're probably going to be fine even if it's modular. Just be aware the power supply is quite a tight fit in there. That negative being said about this case, once you actually get the system put in there, it is quite a nice looking case. For a tempered glass case, which I have Newegg Premier, so I got this for $30 free shipping. If you don't have Newegg Premier, it's going to be $30 plus like $8 in shipping, so closer to $40. But still, for one of the cheapest tempered glass cases on the market, it's not exactly fun to build in, but it does look pretty clean, especially through the glass window once you're done with it. So the cable management, while not the greatest, you don't have a ton of room behind the motherboard tray, it's adequate. And my biggest gripe, like I said, is that whole power supply situation. They definitely could have thought that out better, but the case does have really good water cooling support, though the intake on the front panel is far less than adequate because the only intake is at the very bottom of that front panel. So there are some gripes that I do have with this case, but for a $30 case at least in my case, it was only $30. I think it looks great. And for this particular system with a dual fan GPU as well as a processor that I'm just leaving the stock cooler on. In fact, it's not even the stock cooler that came with the 1600. I'm actually only using the Wraith Stealth in this case. The 1600 actually came with the Spire. But because I'm not planning on overclocking the 1600, at least with this cooler, I'm not really that concerned about temperatures. They will be fine. And the case itself looks very clean now that it's complete. So you can get a lot of PC for $700. And that's what I'm getting at right now. It's a pretty good time to be building a PC, especially if you happen to have access to some cheaper DDR4 memory, whether you're upgrading an old system and you just have it laying around, or whether you have a friend that might want to get rid of it, or whatever the case is. If you can find RAM cheap, the rest of the components right now are actually pretty good values in general, especially if you're going with an RX 580 or a GTX 1060 is another really good value card right now, especially because the RTX cards are going to be coming out soon. Some people will be putting more of those 10 series cards on the used market, and that brings me to the used market. A lot of these parts are used in this particular build. The chassis is brand new. The power supply that I'm actually using, since I had one on hand, is a used power supply. All told, I saved a lot of money by using used parts. The motherboard, for example, I got that for about half off. So the PC building market right now is great, especially if you're willing to utilize the used parts market. But even if you're not, you can build a great system for about $700 US, and it's going to last you for a good long while. It's going to give you great 1080p performance, pretty good 1440p performance if you want to go that route, depending on what games you're playing. So here's where I kick it back to you. Have you built a PC recently, and are you planning on building a PC in the near future? Let us know those things down below. And that's really it, guys. You can like, share, subscribe, all those things down below. Follow me on Instagram and on Twitter at Hoosier Hardware. And as always, I'll see you guys in the next video.